Thank you. The coolest smart society is our vision. It's not something that we have gained yet, but we're working on it. I just say some word in the beginning. In Lithuania, you all know, of course, about Estonia very well, but just the population. We all have had problems with decreasing population, but we are lucky, but the process has stopped, that actually people are returning. Well, partially it's of course salary level, but the second is with the young people who went abroad for working. We want to get education for the children still in Estonia. So we get more thousands of children. We are not aware statistically. We have very good databases, and they are coming back, and it of course creates some problems with, for a school network. And the second one is maybe about our digital advances. You probably know that we have digital citizens, people who have maybe never been in Estonia, living in Singapore, India, or wherever, and we are not doing money laundering, but we are really having companies and paying taxes. So we have already 10 million, more than 10 million euros tax revenues from the people from digital. So citizens who maybe have never been. It's very popular among British because they can stay on the European Union market after that. But why I'm talking about those digital reforms, I had focused more on maybe digital things, but after meeting your colleagues from the Ministry of Education and from a National Audit Office, I understood that your burning point somehow is more school network reform and the teacher salaries. So education is very important. All the digital society what we have built up is based on education, and everybody knows in Estonia that education is very important. But I'm going to tell what we have done, how it's managed, and who is responsible for what, because we have recently made quite important changes. In 2017, we implemented the local authority reform. We used to have more than 200 local governments, and after reform we have 79. Some very small islands were exceptions, so we could remain, but the basic rule was not less than 5,000 people. And the main, one of the main still tasks are keeping the school network on a basic education level, and more than a half of the budget are usually education in those local municipalities, and that means that they are, of course, a very important partner to the ministry. In most of the cases, there were agreements where they were agreed what and how the school network should be changed, but it considers more schools at basic level, basic education level up to 9th grade, and of course the kindergartens are in the hands of local municipalities. But what happened in Estonia before 2010 was that we noticed that the level of equality is somehow changing, and not in a right way, because many municipalities were very small. The people were moving to bigger cities, and of course the first idea of all the lower community directors and school headmasters was that for whatever price we have to keep the school. The school must be open. Whatever happens at the school, if we close the school, then everybody disappears from here. We said that it's kind of criminal thinking. Actually, you should keep good quality school. And if you're not able, you should be honest and tell to the people, let's discuss what we can change. And the decision, what was made, was quite so-called maybe entrepreneurial even. It was in close cooperation with school headmasters, with stakeholders on all levels. But the main principle was that the upper secondary level, or I call them gymnasiums, all it's not right definitions. Gymnasium in English is probably the antique place where the naked men see gymnastics. But the upper secondary education institution is too long, so it's state gymnasium. And the main idea was that we have to share the responsibilities so that everybody understands what they are responsible for. Local governments are responsible, first of all, for kindergarten, then for basic education, first 9 years. If you're not able to keep the school 9 years, do it 6 years, but do it very good, because bad school is not good for anybody. And those gymnasiums, give them to the hands of the central government. And of course, maybe your child has to travel 30 kilometers or 40 kilometers to the closest county center. But still, they don't leave to Tallinn or Tartu, to bigger cities. They stay in the region, they get the education. And after that, maybe they go to university or vocational institution, but they return to they have this link, they don't disappear anywhere. It was very hard in the beginning, of course, because nobody was believing that it is possible. You close our schools, there are protests, but of course, then we had to use even those financial measures. And it became part of our lifelong learning strategy, which is from 2014 to 2020. We're using the Austrian model in a way also, so output-based, performance-based, and programs. And it was called School Network Program. And in that program, it was co-funded by with European money also. The basic idea was that in every county center there will be a state gymnasium, and the local municipalities which close their their gymnasium part, keep only basic school, they get money to renovate or build new building for basic school, which is climate friendly and everything, because in the Soviet Union we had almost the same schools everywhere, and you know very well how expensive it is actually to have those buildings in a way they were built in 1980s, 70s, or even 90s. So that plan was already more suitable for many people, especially for people which were responsible for making the financial decisions on local level also, because they understood that actually they can focus on something which is maybe more useful for them. They can really focus on quality. And now we have, the process was very slow in the beginning, but now, as many things in Estonia happens, it's slow in the beginning, but in the end we had queue behind the ministry store, but more local communities wanted to have those state gymnasium than we had planned. And they were, of course, the local communities which were close to the bigger cities. We thought that they are rich enough or they can manage themselves, but now everybody wants to have this system. So when in the first stage it was somehow a question of honor and pride that you have this school. Now it's more that let it be the good quality, centrally organized, and we will focus on the kindergarten, on basic education, and on the real problems on the local level. And our thing, what we learned also, local municipalities, even if they haven't given to gymnasium part to a central government, they have separated basic school and gymnasium, because that's another problem in our systems, that people don't want to go to vocational education. And in many cases, the problem is that if you start from a first class, you think it's natural that you go to the same school, in the same school up to the 12th class, or to end of gymnasium, and after that you try to go to a vocation or higher education institution or vocation, or in many cases actually you don't do anything, because you have this mediocre general education, but you don't know what to do with your life. So if you have to make this choice in the end of a 9th class or in the end of basic school, it also creates maybe some more and interesting ideas, and we have seen that actually people are choosing maybe or making more decisions which are based not only a habit that everybody is doing, but we are trying really to find the best way. But of course, the structural reform was not only part of it. Very many teachers are already as old as lady and gentleman on this picture. And lifelong learning is, of course, very important, but we got money to implement this reform from European Union, from infrastructure. We got additional money for raising the teacher's salary, but we got also money from inside the system, making the system more efficient, closing the inefficient buildings, some schools which really were maybe too close to each other. So we have been able to increase the teacher's salary almost 10% every year since 2015, I think. So it's the tax systems are slightly different, but the average is about 1,500 in Estonia teacher's salary, minus 20% income tax. And of course, we're trying to raise it in the future also. So it was also part which was well accepted. And we can see already that this year young people made the choices that we had been hoping for, that it's not the salary only, but it's more like the attitude that the teacher's profession is something cool. You are somehow leader for those kids, and you can be leader anywhere else also if you are already a very good teacher. So the number and the academic standard of those applying for teacher training programs has raised at the universities. And of course, talking about the state gymnasiums, we replaced the headmasters also in many cases, that the headmasters they retired or they became headmasters of basic schools, and most of them came really with fresh ideas, relatively young, and they are very important persons in their regions also, because they are somehow, as it's always somebody who is responsible for something very important, you become in this community very well known. Another part of it all is when talking about those PISA tests. Next week will be the new results. Why PISA tests are important is that they are measuring actually in the age of 15 if young people they can read and write. Basically, of course, there are different levels, and the main problem is that In developed countries, in many cases, already 20% of young people 15 years old can't do it. And it's extremely expensive to give those skills later. Because if you're thinking you're 15, end of a basic school, you should study at upper secondary level, you should study in vocational schools. But if you don't have those basic skills, then it's very important, very difficult and very expensive to provide those skills. So we did even reform on inclusive education, which means that those kids which were sent to separate schools or they were kept a little bit separately, in many cases they didn't have very serious, really medical diagnosis. But the question was that the central government was keeping those schools which were for the students with special needs. So we made a reform, we gave money, more than 20 million euros to the local governments, so that those kids really, as their parents also desire that they go to a closest school to a home, they don't have to travel very far away when they are in a basic school. And this reform is still going on, but I think that it will be some kind of success story. Many people say that maybe the quality of the education will suffer if different children are in the classroom, but in real life, if they get this assistance, what is needed and everything else, it works actually. So it was also one of the changes we recently made in 2018. And yes, I'm coming to a conclusion. So you have really to have strong management teams, and they have to know what they are responsible for. And if you want to hold this system, not just running, but to change it to the way the 21st century society needs. Learning teaching environment, if we wouldn't provided the funding to change the environment, to build the new buildings, renovate the old ones, it would have been very difficult to change the network also. Learning everywhere is of course something what we are doing on a very small island where are maybe no teachers, but we are attending the classes simultaneously via Skype or whatever digital measures there are. And next year, I think it will be possible to teach and learn in basic school without paper materials anymore. So you can get all the content digitally, and in many cases, which it means also that you don't need teacher every day probably. And this inclusive education, it's very important, of course, because I think in many countries there is 15–20% of the student cohort already which have some kind of special need. And you have to really include them in the process. So that's an astonishing future was waiting at least us. And we are preparing the next strategy for education sector, and there are very important those personalized learning paths, really, how to really use this digital technology so that everybody can find the best way and you don't need to sit in the classroom. We are using the digital technology in education in very old-fashioned way right now, all over the world, not in separate countries, but all over the world. And of course, if we have created those state gymnasium on regional level, next step is how to make them cooperate with vocational education institutions, higher education institutions, even in basic schools, so that we are still too separate, and we are not considered as equal possibilities. But in future, it will be probably our aim to do really this kind of reform also. So thank you, and questions.
So you were speaking about a very important and a very difficult changing the network, the school network system. And you were mentioning that now you have communities standing in line. So how did you start? How did that first project appear that made people believe that this is workable?
There were two parts. First of what we started it in part of Estonia in Viljandi, where everybody knows where the people living where they can count money, and they are very rational. And the second and more important was probably that Secretary General of Ministry of Education and Research, who was responsible for that reform, was working in this town, Viljandi, for 20 years, I think, from teacher to headmaster to head of Department of Education, and even a vice mayor. So he knew everybody, and he was able to really tell to those rational people that this is a rational idea, because, and it was only one school which was opened in this city, and after it was opened, everybody came to look at it. Wow, what an environment. We have never seen in the world such a good environment for the content, which young teachers, and how enthusiastic. And it was much easier to sell it later to all our regions. But people usually don't believe in the field of education, just talking, they want to see it.
They want to see it, and you managed to show it. Thank you. So we have a few questions. One of them, could you tell what were the key factors of success for this efficient public-private partnership in Estonia?
In the field of education, some local municipalities have used this possibility to build school buildings with the help of this public-private partnership. But more broadly, we have private schools. They are usually religious or alternative pedagogical. But if you want to get full support from the government, central government, when there is a cap, but you can take tuition fee more than 25% of a minimum wage every month, just to make the situation comparable with the municipal and state schools. So, and they have opened, and they are quite popular, and in many cases, maybe children who wanted to stay home in home learning, something like that, they put them to those very small schools. They pay a small amount which covers the difference, which is maybe making the school keeping more expensive. But we are providing funding, we are providing results, but the national curriculum is the same for all kind of schools.